Hi scholars, how are you? Today is September 9th, 2020, and today we're going to discuss systems. We are in COVID-19, and because we're in COVID-19 and we started this since February where we had to begin our virtual learning at home, it's been a bit hard to travel. For spring break last school year, I wanted to go on a trip to the Philippines. I couldn't go. So I didn't get a chance to use the system. I really want to get a chance to use my system and travel to different places around the world. I mean, after all, I'm so close to many fun, wonderful places that I'd love to visit, but I didn't get a chance to use the system. I wonder, what is this system called? What would you call this system? You're right. This system is called a suitcase. This system is designed for transportation. It's designed to carry personal goods. It's designed to carry clothes, maybe personal items, and important things that I wanted to travel with, even though I didn't get a chance to travel. And I'm sure many of you are in the very same situation. But you did notice that I kept on calling this a system. Why is this a system? And what exactly is a system? A system is a collection of interacting parts that work together to perform a function for you. So there's some interacting parts to this system. But before we go on, let's discuss our focus question for today. Our focus question is, how can you identify a system? So before I go any further, as a scientist, I want to get out my science notebook. And I'm going to go ahead to my first blank page. And I am going to write my focus question. First, I had to skip my table of contents because I saved those 2 pages. And as you can see, I began by writing my focus question, and I wrote the very same thing. How can you identify a system? So this will be a great place for you to pause and write, how can you identify a system? Great job. So now as scientists, you're going to be jotting down notes, maybe illustrating, writing different things about a system. So now we're going to look at our system and we're going to try to find some interacting parts to our system. Usually this would be the time if we were in class that we would interact with each other and have discussions. But because you're not here, I'm going to identify a few interacting parts to the system, and then as scientists, I would like for you to identify some more interacting parts and then tell me what function does that interacting part have with my system. So the first interacting part I'm going to identify is the zipper. And what is the zipper used for? This zipper is used to open and close my system. So if I'm on my vacation and I'm on the beach, I'm going to open up my system to get I'm going to open my system to get my beach towel, maybe my sunblock so I won't get burned, I won't start peeling. So this is what I would use my system to do. Another part of my system that has an interacting part that's quite useful to me are the wheels. I'm going to have to lift it up so you can see the wheels. Now, usually you can carry 50 pounds per suitcase or your luggage. And I usually fill it to the very brim. 50 pounds, I try to go to like 51 pounds and 52 if they allow me. And if they say no for the 52, then I take out 2 pounds and put it in my pocketbook or handbag. That's what I try to do. But when I have the wheels, then I don't have to hold it in my hand. I can just roll my system and then it will help me. Additionally, sometimes you have to carry it in your hand. This handle helps me let's first talk about the handle. The handle helps me roll my system. So then it's easy to use the wheel. So the wheel and the handle work together for me so I don't have to carry that 50 or 51 pounds when I'm stuffing my system. An additional interacting part that I'd like to identify is the handle. The handle helps me to lift it up, sometimes especially when I need to lift it up over, sometimes there's a little lifted area when you're walking, you just need to lift it over that part. So I have to lift it up. Sometimes I use the handle. So let's go ahead and we'll go ahead and talk about the system again. This is our word wall word. A system is any collection of interacting parts that work together to perform a whole function. So we know there's so many interacting parts. Now, every system has some subsystems, and the subsystems themselves work together. So we've discussed a suitcase. Remember now, what I would like you to do, we talked about several of the interacting parts. We've identified a zipper, we've identified the wheels, we've identified the handle, we've also identified the wheels, handle, we've also identified the zipper. What I'd like for you to do as a scientist, you're going to open up your science notebook and you're going to identify several other interacting parts for this system, and you're going to jot down how it helps this system perform its duties. Secondly, let's talk about another system. So sometimes, and actually I haven't done this in a long time, but when I went home for the Christmas last year, I rode the railroad. I took the Amtrak just because I wanted to see how it was, and I went to Washington, D.C. using the Amtrak because I wanted to go visit a museum that I hadn't gone to. The Museum of African American History. I never went there, so I said, I need to go there. So I took the train from Fayetteville, North Carolina, all the way to Washington. So I rode the railroad. The railroad is another system, but that railroad has lots of interacting parts. The railroad also has several subsystems. I wonder if you can identify some of those subsystems in the railroad. Now, scientists, I'd like for you to maybe illustrate the railroad and illustrate some subsystems that you've identified on the railroad, as well as tell us what the purpose or how does those subsystems help the systems operate, or the interacting parts. What interacting parts help the system operate? Okay? Now, we're going to stop for a minute. Okay, scholars, so when I went home last December, I wanted to go to a museum, and I decided I was going to take the railroad. The railroad that I took was called Amtrak. I wanted to take the railroad from Fayetteville, North Carolina to D.C. to go to the African American Museum because I had not been. Well, the railroad is also a system. That system has several subsystems. That system also has several subsystems. A subsystem is a system inside of a larger system. How can you identify the subsystems within a railroad? As a scientist that you are, I'd like for you to identify the subsystems within the railroad systems. Now, remember that a system has several interacting parts that help the system perform. Several interacting parts that help the system perform its duty. So we know we have a system, we have our subsystem because there are several subsystems within our larger system, and the system has several interacting parts. So as a scientist, you're going to identify those subsystems within a railroad, and you're going to figure out how do those subsystems help the railroad perform its duties of maybe transporting people or goods. So I discussed the railroad Amtrak. There are also different lines of railroad that perform different duties. For instance, there's CSX. CSX is another company, and that company normally transport goods like food, automobile parts, sometimes automobiles as well. So we know we have different systems, different subsystems, different companies that travel. So today we've discussed our focus question. If we go back to it, how can you identify a system? And we've identified a system. We've identified different interacting parts for this system. You're going to identify some of your own. We discussed a railroad. We want to identify some subsystems that you have found or you will find within a railroad, and tell me how those subsystems interact in the larger system of the railroad. Have a wonderful